Welcome back to Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm dear darling, as we see what's going on our lovely island of Fawnhallow today, where we'll be relaxing as per usual. I'm not really sure exactly what I'm going to be talking about, but you know, that's for us to discover along the way. But yeah, a bit of a late night episode today. Not really for particularly any reason. I just sort of didn't really feel like recording, although I still had to record some Okami for tomorrow, so we'll see how that goes. But good evening, everyone. Right now in Fawnhallow, it's 11:58 p.m. on Tuesday, September 24th, 2024. Oh, shooting stars, how wonderful. Been a long time since we had a meteor shower. Not that we're gonna really be doing much of it, but yeah. What should we talk about today? That's a great question. I feel like there was something I wanted to talk about. I can't remember what it was though, off the top of my head, so that will just have to sort of stand by the wayside. I mean, part of me is also like, at some point I do want to talk about, I was going to call it Overlords. It's not called Overlords. What's that game called? What's that new Valve shooter MOBA game called? I don't know. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. What is it called? Hold on. It's on my Steam. Dead Lore, that sort of thing. But I haven't really played enough of it to make a judgment. I mean, I played it for the first time like a couple of days ago, and I said a friend, I mean, they asked me like what do I think of it, and I was like, I think it's hard for me to make a judgment at the moment, but like I mean, that probably sounds more negative than expected, because I'm sure most normal people would just be like, oh yeah, it's like good if it's something that they found like average or like indifferent to. But me being me, it's sort of just like I'm reserving judgment until I can. Well, I didn't know Celeste was cool like that. Okay, I guess we're sort of wondering that. We need to find something to sit down on, otherwise we're sort of going around for ages. Or we can just walk, I don't know. I'm using my Joy-Con drifty Joy-Cons because I forgot to charge my Joy-Cons yesterday, but still. It's hard to judge a game, I suppose, especially when you just started playing it, because I always feel like games or things in general should be given their fair shake. Well, I mean, this is not like a particularly controversial opinion, I hope, but things should be given their fair shake before you really make a passing judgment on them. You know, like opinions are, you know, fine and good and all. Everyone's got different opinions. That's just only natural. But to be able to assert, for the motivation to assert them so strongly, you know, you got to have sort of like reasoning to back them up. Well, you can have reasoning as sort of just like, oh, it's just kind of like what I feel or my vibes or whatever. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's totally fair. You can feel that way, but to have it in like a court discussion, or to have it like as a review, or to have it as a point for I didn't mean to swap it, or to have it, or attempt to have it as a point of like further introspection or critique, is a bit meaningless if there's nothing really which can stand behind that motivation at the same time, you know. So I mean, that's why I'm just like, Deadlock is like, it seems interesting, like it has some cool concepts for it going on. I'm not 100% sure like how I feel about it entirely, mainly because I don't think I know enough about the game to really engage on it on a more meaningful level yet. I feel like very much I'm still just sort of learning like vague ideas about it. Like I only played 3 games, 4 games? I can't remember actually at this point. Maybe we played a bit more games than I expected. Oh, we need to go to like the island, I suppose, at some point to actually sell half these things I'm holding. Sorry, to deposit half these things. I also didn't realise I was holding so many presents. But yeah, it's a sort of thing where it's like, it's hard to make a judgment when you, or it's, in my opinion, it's hard to make a fair judgment if you don't feel like you can engage with the mechanics or the knowledge base of the game in a meaningful way. And that's basically how I sort of felt while playing it. It was like, yeah, I got the general concepts of what's going on, but I don't know enough about the game to really understand like any sort of sense of strategy or what I'm doing, or I'm not really employing much. I'm using like my holdover knowledge from other games, which is fine, like there's nothing wrong with that, but it's also just like, that's inherently, I suppose, in comparative act, right? You know, I'm immediately comparing the game I'm playing to like a game I've played before, which is not necessarily fair on the game itself, which has its own sort of like individual identity. But that doesn't mean like you should completely, like, what I mean when I say this is like, I don't think you should completely shut off like instincts as well, or like initial impressions. Like, we as humans actually have like a pretty good, I'm not sure, pretty good instinct. I mean, I think that applies more to survival instincts than anything else, but instincts matter. Like if, you know, as people say, if something feels wrong, then listen to your body's like sort of natural way of uncovering small details here and there about the conscious mind might overlook. Don't just write something off because you're just like, oh, I don't have a reasoning for it necessarily. So the initial impressions is like, yeah, actually it seems pretty decently fun, although I'm not 100% sure it's exactly my style game, mainly because I find I'm not like super crazy about shooters or anything, and it actually seems like shooting actually matters a lot more in this game than I expected it to. Like it actually does seem like straight up a shooter MOBA. It's not like Smite in my opinion, which is Smite is just more like a MOBA, just kind of like from the third dimension in my opinion, which is not a bad thing. Like that don't take that to mean that's like a bad thing. Like how dare Smite do that? I think it's definitely its own unique thing, but that's the impression I thought Deadlock was. No, Deadlock actually is a shooter, but it's more got like a sort of MOBA frame around it of how you play games and rounds. And it's a thing which seems to take a lot from learn from a lot of other MOBAs. I mean, Valve of course have their own very popular MOBA. You might have heard of it, called Dota 2, where they sort of tried to find all this sort of like laning phase followed by like the sort of mid-game roaming phase with like how the gold and XP ends up getting like distributed and things like that. And I will say I do quite like the aesthetic. It's an interesting sort of like 1900s to 1920s. I'm not going to say noir because it's not quite noir style, but like that sort of gritty style, but with like an injection of fantasy. I will say one complaint though about character design is that like I can't remember which characters it is one of them with a bow, and then like the like samurai alien, as I understand she is, like those characters feel really like aesthetically out of place compared to the others, but so be it. Like whatever, it's not really a big deal. It's just sort of like when I was scrolling through the heroes, I was just like, oh, you know, like gritty fantasy 1900s, gritty fantasy 1900s, space alien samurai, and I'm just like, what? Anyway, not the point. So like first impressions do matter to a game, but also, you know, so does developing the time to like actually understand it properly. I feel like I talk more about the meta side of like critiquing and reviewing more than I actually critique or review things myself, which, you know, I feel like is very, I suppose, in favour of keeping of what I do. It's just like, it's hard, I feel like, not hard, but I feel like it's unfair to make a judgment based off something which you don't fully understand, right? But at the same time, I acknowledge that first impressions still will hold weight, you know? You have an instinct about something where you're just like, I don't think this mechanic's going to be fun. You might be unsurprised to find yourself proven right as you play the game more and be like, oh yeah, this mechanic actually just straight up is not fun. I'm like, I don't care about this mechanic. It's just like not an engaging way to play with a game or something. Like, what I mean to say is basically don't discredit it in that sense. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of like why I'm sort of like reserving judgment on it, and it's why I don't talk about and review games on the Animal Crossing until like I've completed it in its entirety. Well, I'm sure I can make judgments, I can talk about it beforehand of like how I'm feeling. I feel like it's only fair to see it from a full perspective, but at the same time you might argue that seeing things from a full perspective is technically something you can only do at the end of playing a game, but it's also something which you need to build up over the course of a game. So really you should have like mini check-in points every now and then to just be like, oh, what do I think about this game? What do I think about certain mechanics within it? Excuse me. Because it's not always so straightforward, right? Because especially after you finish a game, you might not remember some of the earlier moments of a games or things which like became an issue, because some things can be an issue like only when you're new to a game. Like it's like maybe the tutorialization is too obtuse, it's too difficult to understand what's going on with it, but as you got used to it, as you personally like figured out how to interface and play with the mechanics, it was fine. But you could very easily forget that, I suppose, if you didn't like jot it down at the beginning. Yeah, and I suppose there's other things which can fall into that category as well, you know. Like, I think a thing that comes to mind is Night in the Woods is one of my favourite games, but I fully admit that Night in the Woods has, like, an incredibly slow, it's a slow burn, to begin with. Like, where it's it's very much like humdrum sort of slice of life for like the beginning 2/3 or something of a game, which is totally fine. Like I find it interesting as like a character exploration, but it's something which will probably turn a lot of people off because they sort of be like, when does something actually happen? Because some stuff does happen. It does eventually become like sort of like interesting small town sort of mystery to a small scale, not like a crazy big scale. It's not like Oxenfree or anything like that, but it takes a while to get there. And, you know, is it fair to critique the game based off the first 2/3 or the last third? And I guess the answer is, you know, somewhere in between. You kind of got to critique it on all aspects of things. But I guess it's just kind of easier to talk about first impressions, right? Because there's something that you can more immediately talk about, your own instincts about a game. But, you know, I've seen time and time again games. I mean, it's often gacha games because they're the ones which tend to have like more lasting sort of prevalence or things like that. Not always, but, you know, of recent times, of how people can grossly misunderstand certain mechanics and how they might play in the long run. I think the one that sticks with me, I wasn't quite there at the beginning of Genshin Impact and like oil paintbrush. I didn't know this was one of the options in Neopets. How much does this cost? Neopets. Oh, it's only 1.6 million. It's actually a lot cheaper than I thought. I guess it must have been a new rotation of requesting stuff. The Void Within, by the way, story is getting so weird. Like, I couldn't help but laugh. It's almost a shame that I wasn't recording last time I did the story, but like, I love this. Page 10, by the way, of chapter 5 is what I'm looking at. Whether one of the antagonists goes, "No, it's not. To me, it's clear as black and white." It's so, I don't know. I guess I find it so corny. In a way. Anyway, people are hyped for. Just a side note here on Neopets. People were really hyped for, you know, Neopets to be like, "Oh, finally, it's a whole new plot and everything like that." And now people are getting very disillusioned and bored of it because it's sort of like, oh, you know, I have to continuously do things every single day forever, which, you know, do I want to do that? No, probably not. The Fairy Festival's also started. I don't know how we get fairy quests. Oh, receive today's fairy quest. Okay, what you have to do, if you don't know how to do this, you open up a shop wizard. And then you receive today's fairy quest. You find out what the item is. The Battle Fairy. Tuscanini puzzle. Search it. 300 Neo points. It's so cheap. You can't use a super shop wizard, I guess, while doing it, but... Oh, I can only carry a maximum of 50 items. Apparently I've got quite a lot of things in my inventory then. Okay, let's put stuff away. Yeah. Where was I going with this? I don't know where I was going with this. Just the general idea about, like, first impressions do matter, but they also are not necessarily representative of things. For better and for worse, I suppose. Like, I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just sort of just is what it is. And it's, I guess I'm sort of just like wrestling with the idea of like how much worth is a first impression for like a media property, for a game, for a book, a movie or something like that. Because I'm just like, I do talk about them like quite a lot and I'm like, yeah, I'm having a good time with this and that sort of thing. But at the same time, I'm also like, the critical side of my brain is like, you know, it's not a fair judgment at this point. You know, anything can change. Things are not necessarily always the same. Things can be different. You know, things aren't always so like cut and dry. Things aren't always so clear with this evaluation. You got to kind of look at things from a perspective of like looking forward and looking backwards. Oh, I forgot the thing about Genshin. So yeah, what I was gonna say is like I wasn't around for like the start of Genshin or anything like that. But it's amusing to see how the meta was like right at the beginning of the game and how it's evolved to now. Because it's a thing which I'm like vaguely aware of, like from games I've played, is that healers often are really, really good when you start out gacha games, and eventually people get good enough to learn how to play without healers, or get strong enough that they don't need healers, and then since healers don't contribute any damage in these sort of games, in any sort of thing, that eventually they fall off. Like it's happened like Fire Emblem Heroes, it was like that as well. I mean, I'm not sure actually Fire Emblem Heroes, the healers were ever all that good, to be honest. They had to have like massive buffs, but... And it happened in Genshin, where Chi-Chi was like one of the most sought after characters because she had insane healing, and then now she's like one of the worst characters in the game because she provides nothing except healing. And most people are like, I want to maximize damage. I mean, part of that is also to do with the fact that the game sort of encourage you to do damage, because the limited time modes are basically like do as much damage in a short time as possible. If they had a game mode all about surviving as long as possible, then probably Chi-Chi would like kind of shine, but even then maybe I think other characters might shine more because of a lack of energy she generates. But anyway, not point. What I was gonna say is, yeah, like things evolve and people don't... I'm not saying people as in like in a critical way, but I'm just saying that it's like we as humans in general can only make so many assumptions from the first impressions that we get, and there's only like so many things which have much of an evaluation in the first place. Other things, you know, you discover when it comes to time, and some things that only really come to light after a lot of time of playing or experiencing a game or a media property, etc, etc, etc. And again, I want to reiterate, this is not a bad thing. It's just sort of like I'm just wrestling with it in my head, the idea of first impressions and how true they are, I suppose, on like my final perspective of things. And also, I suppose, last impressions also, like let's take the converse of this. How reflective are they of my true feelings on the game? Like I think Anarchy comes to mind, where like my first impressions like was pretty good, and then like my last impressions were like, I don't want to play this game anymore because I made a foolish decision of trying to perfect every level, and I was not someone who actually wanted to end up perfecting every level. But it's not to say that the game was bad or anything. I think the game was like silly, harmless fun, as long as I engaged with it in a way which engage with it all that way, and I sort of just betrayed myself there by not really sticking to that. Not like not knowingly, mind you. It's not like I did it with a sole purpose of being like, I'm going to ruin my own experience of this game. Not ruin, but I'm going to slightly sour my own experience of this game, because I didn't know that was going to happen. It just kind of did, and that's sometimes that's just how it goes. Anywho, what's I going to say about this? I don't really know. I think that's pretty good, and I'm going to go round this episode off here. So, if you have been watching, thank you very much. It's been Animal Crossing New Horizons. I've been Dear Darling. Likes, comments, subscription, shares, greatly appreciated. Socials, Discord down below. Hope to see each other again, but for now, it's our farewell. So until next time, bye-bye for now.